You're gonna bring us whatever we want, sweetheart. And you're gonna smile while you do it." The man who said that had his hand around Emma Keene's wrist before she could pull away, and the diner went quiet. The way diners go quiet when everyone in the room knows something wrong is happening, and nobody knows what to do about it. Emma did not scream. She did not drop the plate in her other hand. She looked at the man with the particular expression of someone who has been underestimated her entire life and has not yet decided whether this is the moment to correct that assumption. Rex decided for her. If this is your first time here, please subscribe to our channel right now and hit that notification bell. Drop a comment below and tell me the name of your city. I want to see how far this story travels before it's done. Now let's go back to Keene's family diner, because what happened in the next hour was going to change every single person in that building, starting with a 25-year-old police officer who almost didn't stop for coffee that night. Emma Keene had been working her father's diner for 6 weeks. 6 weeks since she had come back from 2 years at the culinary program in Charlotte with a certificate she was proud of and a plan she was less certain about, which was to come home to Millhaven and help her father run the business he had built from nothing over 30 years until her mother got sick and the medical bills started and the staff shrank from 7 to 3, because that was the math of a small family diner when everything hit at once. Her father, Martin Keene, had not asked her to come back. He had mentioned in the particular way that parents mention things they will not ask for directly, that the diner was getting harder to manage alone, and that the evening shift had been inconsistent since he lost his last 2 servers in the same month. Emma had finished her program on a Friday and was back in Millhaven by Sunday and behind the counter by Monday morning, and Martin had looked at her when she walked in and said, "You didn't have to," and she had said, "I know," and that was the entire conversation about it. She was good at the work, not just competent, genuinely good the way people are good at things that are in their blood before they are in their training. She knew how to read a room. She knew which tables needed checking and which ones needed leaving alone. She knew how to carry 4 plates on 2 arms without making it look like an achievement. And she knew how to manage a difficult customer with the particular combination of patience and firmness that kept a situation from escalating without making the person feel managed. She had not, in 6 weeks, encountered anything she could not handle. Until tonight. The 2 men came in at 8:47, which she knew because she had checked the clock when the bell above the door rang, not because she was suspicious, but because she was tracking the shift the way she always tracked it, aware of time and tables and what needed doing in what order. They took the booth in the far corner, the one that Martin called the trouble booth, because it had the worst sight line from the counter and the most privacy from the rest of the room, and she had taken their order without incident coffee for one and a full plate for the other, and nothing about either of them had registered as a problem beyond the general quality of their attention, which was the kind of attention that moves across a room, cataloging things the way a person catalogs things when they are thinking about what belongs to them. The diner had 4 other occupied tables. A retired couple who came in every Tuesday and Thursday and always ordered the same thing, and always left a 15% tip that Martin had stopped being insulted by because at least it was reliable. 2 women in their 40s who were clearly in the middle of something difficult and personal and had chosen the diner for the privacy that comes with background noise. A man eating alone at the counter, early 60s, reading something on his phone with the focused absorption of someone who had decided the phone was more interesting than the room. And in the far right booth by the window, a young police officer in a dark navy uniform with a German shepherd under the table and a coffee mug he had been working on for 20 minutes. Emma had noticed the officer when he came in. She noticed everyone who came in, that was the job, but she had noticed him specifically because of the dog, which was a serious animal, all business with the kind of posture that suggested it had never done anything purely for fun in its life, and was comfortable with that. She had asked if she could get anything for the dog, and the officer had smiled just briefly and said Rex had already eaten, and she had refilled his coffee and moved on. The trouble started the way trouble usually starts in public places, not all at once, but in stages, each one slightly past the last, each one testing whether the room was going to push back. Stage 1 was the volume. The two men had been talking at a reasonable register when they came in, and by the time Emma brought the full plate to the booth, they were talking at a volume that was not appropriate for a diner at 9 in the evening, with other people in the room who had not asked to be part of their conversation. She had not said anything. Volume alone was not a crisis. People got loud. Stage 2 was the commentary. When she set the plate down, the broad-shouldered one, the one with the shaved head, who had the physical presence of someone who had spent a significant portion of his life using his size to communicate things he did not want to have to say out loud, looked at her and said something to his companion that was not directed at her, but was clearly about her, and his companion laughed in the specific way that is designed to be heard. Emma picked up the empty coffee cup from the edge of the table and said, "Can I get you anything else?" The shaved-headed man looked up at her slowly. "We're good, sweetheart." She went back to the counter. Stage 3 took 8 minutes. She was clearing the retired couple's table they had finished, and left the 15% and their "thanks you, dear." That was lovely the way they always did when she heard the shaved-headed man raise his voice enough that it carried across the room clearly. "Hey, another coffee? When you have a minute." She turned. "I'll be right there." "Make it faster than a minute," he said, not aggressive enough to be a clear line crossed, just past the edge of courtesy, in the particular way that is designed to be impossible to formally object to. Emma refilled the coffee. She did it without comment. The lean one, the quieter of the two, watched her pour with a smile that she did not like and did not acknowledge. "You work here every night?" the shaved-headed one asked. "Most nights," she said. "Your name's Emma," he said. "I saw it on the sign outside. Keen's Family Diner." "That your family, my father's place," she said. "Nice little spot," he said in the tone of someone describing something as little when they mean something else by little. "Must be hard keeping a place like this going. Overhead utilities, all that. Things happen to small businesses all the time. You lose a few regulars, you get a rough month, place starts to struggle." He looked at her steadily. "Good to have people watching out for you." Emma looked at him for 2 full seconds. "I'll check back on you in a bit," she said. She went back to the counter and stood with her back to the room for a moment, her hands flat on the surface, processing what he had just said with the careful attention it deserved. It was not a threat she could point to. It was the shape of a threat, the outline of one delivered in the deniable language that people use when they want you to understand something they are not going to say directly. She thought about calling Martin, who was in the back office doing the week's ordering. She decided against it. Not because she could not handle it, because she was not yet sure what it was, and she was not going to alarm her father over something that might resolve itself. That was the moment she learned something important about certain situations, which is that they do not resolve themselves. They escalate, and the rate of escalation is controlled entirely by the people choosing to escalate, which means that the person trying to manage it is always one step behind. Stage 4 happened when she was delivering the check to the women at the middle table. She heard the shaved-headed man say loudly enough for the room to hear clearly, "Hey, sweetheart, come back here when you're done." The women at the table looked at each other. The man at the counter looked up from his phone. Emma finished delivering the check and went to the booth. "What can I get you?" she said. "Sit down," the shaved-headed man said. "Talk to us for a minute." "I'm working," she said. "Is there something I can get you? I said sit down." "I heard you," Emma said. "I'm working. Can I get you something from the menu?" He looked at her for a moment with the flat, assessing look of someone deciding what they need to do next to get what they want, and then he reached out and took hold of her wrist. His grip was not gentle. It was the grip of someone making a point about the difference between what she thought her options were and what her actual options were. And Emma's hand tightened around the pad she was holding, and she felt the particular cold clarity that comes when a situation crosses from something manageable into something that has its own momentum. "Let go of my wrist," she said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that later. In the moment, she was not thinking about how she sounded. She was thinking about her father in the back office and the retired couple who had just left, and whether the two women at the middle table were going to be all right, and how many steps it was from this booth to the counter. "We just want to have a conversation," the shaved-headed man said. "About your father's place. About how things work around here now. About how people who are smart make arrangements that keep their businesses running smooth." He smiled. It was not a good smile. "That's all. Just a conversation." The lean one had shifted in the booth so that he was partially blocking the exit from the table. Not obvious. Calculated. The diner was very quiet. The man at the counter had his phone face down now. The two women at the middle table were not moving. Nobody was moving, which was the specific paralysis that descends on a room when violence becomes possible, and every person in it is running the same calculation about what will happen if they become the one who acts. Emma said very quietly and very precisely, "I am asking you one more time to let go of my wrist." The shaved-headed man opened his mouth, and Rex growled. It came from under the booth by the window, and it was not a small sound. It was the sound a trained working dog makes when it has completed its assessment of a situation and has arrived at a conclusion, and is communicating that conclusion to everyone in the room with complete authority. Deep controlled, the kind of sound that moves through a space and lands in the chest before it registers in the ears. The shaved-headed man turned his head. Lucas Reed was already standing. He had not made a production of it. He had not pushed back from the table or said anything or drawn attention to what he was doing. He was simply standing the way people stand when they have made a decision, and the decision was made some time ago, and the standing is just the physical expression of something already determined. He was in his full uniform, dark navy, and he had left his coffee on the table, and he was walking across the diner with the particular quality of movement that comes from training and composure, and the specific confidence of someone who has been in difficult rooms before, and has learned that the way you enter a difficulty matters as much as anything you do inside it. Rex moved beside him, not in front, not pulling beside him perfectly synchronized the way a K9 and handler move when they have worked together long enough that the coordination has stopped being something they think about. The shaved-headed man's hand loosened on Emma's wrist. Not releasing, loosening. The body's involuntary response to a stimulus that the mind is still trying to process. Lucas stopped in front of the booth. He looked at the shaved-headed man with the flat, patient attention of someone who has all night and knows it and needs the other person to understand that. He said, "Let her go." 2 words. Not a command in the formal law enforcement sense, not a threat. A statement of the next thing that was going to happen in this room, delivered with the absolute calm of someone for whom the outcome of the statement was not in question. The shaved-headed man looked at him. He looked at the badge. He looked at Rex, who had stopped beside Lucas, and was looking at him with amber eyes that did not blink and did not waver, and communicated a very specific operational readiness. He released Emma's wrist. Emma stepped back. She did not run. She moved one step, then two, creating distance without making it into a retreat, and she put the counter between herself and the booth in 3 efficient movements. The lean one had not moved from his position at the edge of the booth. Lucas did not look at him yet. He was looking at the shaved-headed man with the same patient attention, reading the room the way he had been trained to read rooms, which was from the point of highest threat outward, and the highest threat in this room was the man in front of him, who had not yet made a decision about how this was going to go. "You want to tell me what's going on here tonight?" Lucas said. Conversational. Easy. The tone of someone who already knows the answer and is giving the other person the opportunity to participate in the telling of it. The shaved-headed man leaned back in the booth. He spread his hands in the performance of reasonableness. "Officer, we were just having a conversation with the young lady. Nobody was getting hurt." "She asked you to let go of her wrist," Lucas said. "That's not a conversation. That's a restraint." "It was a misunderstanding." "Tell me about the misunderstanding." The shaved-headed man looked at Lucas for a moment. His eyes moved to Rex. Back to Lucas. "We're just customers," he said. "Having dinner." Lucas said, "What's your name?" A pause. "Devlin." "Devlin? What do you do, Devlin?" "I'm in property management." "Property management," Lucas said. He nodded slowly, the nod of someone filing information carefully. "And what brought you to Keen's Diner tonight?" "Hungry," Devlin said, and smiled. The lean one at the edge of the booth made a small sound that was not quite a laugh. Lucas looked at him for the first time. "What's your name?" The lean one looked at Devlin. Devlin gave the smallest possible nod. "Garrett," the lean one said. "Garrett, you comfortable where you're sitting?" Garrett looked at him. "I'm fine." "Good," Lucas said. "I need you to slide back into the booth, all the way. Give yourself some room." He said it with the same even quality, no elevation, no edge, just the next thing that was going to happen. Garrett slid back into the booth. Rex sat. Emma was behind the counter with her right hand on the counter surface, and her breathing under control, and her eyes on the booth, and she was thinking with the strange clarity that arrives in the middle of difficult things, that she had been underestimating this moment for the last 20 minutes, and that the officer by the window had been reading it correctly since before she had admitted to herself what it was. Lucas looked at Devlin. "Property management," he said again. "Who's the property you're managing tonight?" Devlin held his smile. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do," Lucas said. "And I think you should think carefully about your next few choices. Because I've been sitting in this diner for 40 minutes, and I've been watching this room for 40 minutes, and I have a very clear picture of how this evening has gone." He paused. Rex has a clearer one. Rex did not move. His amber eyes were on Devlin, with the complete, uninterrupted focus of an animal who has identified the thing that matters and has decided nothing else in the room exists until it is resolved. Devlin looked at the dog for 3 full seconds, and something in his face made a decision. It was not the decision Lucas was hoping for. "We'll finish up and go," Devlin said. He reached for his coffee. "No trouble." Lucas said, "I don't think you're going anywhere just yet." Devlin looked up. The smile was still there, but it had changed quality the way a light changes when the source behind it shifts. "We haven't done anything, officer. Couple of guys having dinner. You can't hold us here." I'm not holding you, Lucas said. I'm having a conversation. Same as you were having with Ms. Keene. He looked at Devlin steadily. You mentioned property management. You mentioned things happening to small businesses. You mentioned arrangements. His voice had not changed. Not one register. I'm interested in what you meant by all of that. Devlin said nothing. Garrett in the booth had his hands flat on the table and his eyes down, and he was doing the calculation that people do when they are in a situation that has gone further than they expected, and they are trying to locate the exit. Emma watched from the counter. She watched Lucas Reed stand in front of a man twice his age with a record she did not know yet, but could read in the way Devlin held himself, the way people carry history in their body, when the history involves other rooms like this one, other moments, where someone had to decide whether to step back or step forward. She watched Lucas not move. She watched Rex not move, and she understood with the particular understanding that arrives when you see something done correctly and recognize it as correct, because it is the opposite of what you expected, that what Lucas was doing was not aggressive, and was not passive, and was not the performance of authority. It was the real thing. The actual substance of what it meant to stand between a person who needed protection and the thing they needed protection from, and to do it without flinching, and without escalating, and without giving the other party anything to grab onto, except the simple, immovable fact of your presence. Devlin set his coffee mug down. He looked at Lucas, at Rex, at the distance between where he was and where the door was. He made a sound that was not quite a word, and then his hand went to his jacket pocket, and Lucas moved not dramatically, just a step forward, and a shift of position that put him closer and put Rex closer, and said clearly, without any words at all, that whatever Devlin was reaching for the reach was not going to go the way Devlin intended. Devlin went very still. Slowly, Lucas said. Whatever you're getting. Slowly. Devlin took his hand out of his pocket. He was holding a phone. Lucas looked at the phone. He looked at Devlin. He said nothing. Devlin said, I need to make a call. You can make a call, Lucas said. From the station, when we're done talking. And Devlin Marsh property manager looked at a 25-year-old police officer and a 9-year-old German shepherd, and at the diner full of people who were watching this with the held-breath attention of witnesses who had stopped being bystanders, and he understood for the first time all evening that this night was not going the way he had planned it. Rex's tail moved once. Emma Keene put both hands flat on the counter and breathed. And outside, without anyone in the room knowing it yet, a second patrol unit turned onto the street 3 blocks away, drawn by a call that had been placed 6 minutes ago by a man at the counter who had put his phone face down after he made it and gone back to looking at the room, as if nothing had changed, because Ed Colby, who owned the Harbor Light Diner 2 towns over and had a nephew who waited tables at Keen's on weekends, had taught him that when something starts going wrong in a diner, the most important thing you can do, while the person in uniform handles the room, is quietly make sure backup is coming. And backup was coming. The phone sat on the table between them like a grenade nobody wanted to acknowledge. Devlin had not put it away. He had set it face down on the table after Lucas told him the call could wait, and it sat there in the silence of the booth as a statement. The statement of a man who had made a communication he expected to mean something and had not yet received confirmation that it meant what he intended. Lucas had seen that move before. Not the specific phone, not the specific diner, but the shape of the move, the implicit message of, I have already set something in motion, and what happens next depends on whether you understand that. He had seen it in parking lots and in apartment hallways, and once in a convenience store at 2 in the morning when a man placed a phone on the counter next to his wallet and looked at the cashier with the patient expression of someone waiting for arithmetic to resolve. The move meant backup was coming. Not the kind Lucas had called for. The other kind. He did not change his posture. He did not look toward the door or check his watch, or give Devlin any indication that the phone had communicated anything other than a man who wanted to make a call. But he shifted his weight forward 1 inch, which Rex felt immediately, and Rex adjusted, which was the whole point of the shift, not to telegraph to the room, but to let his partner know that the situation had moved into a different phase. "Devlin," Lucas said, "how long have you been in property management?" Devlin looked at him. He was running his own calculations. Lucas could see it the way people run calculations when they are in the middle of something that has not gone according to plan, and they are trying to locate the variable that disrupted it. "Few years," Devlin said. "Local work, or you travel?" "Local, mostly." "Millhaven's not a big town," Lucas said. "I've been here 2 years. I know most of the property management outfits operating in the area." He paused. "I don't recognize your name." Devlin said nothing. "Garrett," Lucas said, without looking away from Devlin. "Who do you two work for?" Garrett, who had been sitting very still in the booth with his hands flat on the table, and the expression of a man who had realized approximately 8 minutes ago that he was in a situation he had not fully agreed to when he got into the car tonight, looked at Devlin. It was the look of someone asking for permission to exist. Devlin gave him nothing. "I'm asking you," Lucas said to Garrett. "Not him. You." Garrett's jaw moved. He was maybe 26, 27, with the lean, restless energy of someone who had grown up in a hurry and had not entirely found his footing yet. He was not the one who had grabbed Emma's wrist. He was not the one who had made the comments about small businesses and arrangements. He was the one who had laughed at the right moments and positioned himself at the edge of the booth, and he was now sitting with the reality of what those small participations added up to, which was a uniformed officer and a German shepherd standing 3 feet away, and a question being asked directly at him. "We work for Crail," Garrett said. The name landed. Devlin's expression did not change. That was the tell. A person who had not expected the name to be said would have reacted. Devlin did not react because he had done the calculation faster than Garrett and had already moved to the next position, which was containment. "Garrett," Devlin said. His voice was even, instructional. "He already knows," Garrett said. "Officer, we didn't come here to hurt anybody. That's the truth. We were just supposed to talk to her. That's all Crail said. Go talk to the girl, explain how things work, make sure she understood the situation." "What situation?" Lucas said. Garrett looked at Devlin again. Devlin was looking at the table. "The Keene place is on a block Crail's been buying up for 8 months, Garrett said. "He wants the whole block. Diner's the last holdout. Old man Keene won't sell. Crail figured if someone talked to the daughter, explained the practical side, she'd work on her father." He stopped. "That's it. That's the whole thing." Emma behind the counter had heard every word. She had been standing with her hands on the counter, and her breathing controlled, and her eyes on Lucas and Rex and the booth, and she heard Garrett say 8 months, and she heard him say last holdout, and something cold moved through her chest, because she understood immediately what that meant, and why Crail, whoever Crail was, had sent 2 men to her father's diner on a Tuesday night instead of sending another letter or another offer through another lawyer. Because the letters hadn't worked. Because the offers hadn't worked. Because her father had said no 8 times in 8 months, and the only thing left was to make the no feel more expensive than the yes. She said, "His name is Gerald Crail." Lucas looked at her. "He's been trying to buy this diner since February," Emma said. "My father has a folder of correspondence in his desk that's 4 inches thick. Every letter is the same. Offers, then lower offers dressed up as final offers, then legal language about zoning compliance and code review. She looked at the booth. And now this. Devlin looked at her for the first time since Lucas had stood up. Something in his expression shifted. Not remorse, a kind of recalibration, the look of someone who had underestimated a variable and was adjusting. "Ms. Keene," Lucas said, "is your father in the building? Back office," she said. "Can you get him? Don't explain anything yet. Just ask him to come out." Emma went to the back. The booth was quiet. Garrett had the expression of a man who understood that he had said something important and was not sure whether that made his situation better or worse. Devlin had gone back to looking at the table with the self-contained patience of someone who had been in rooms like this before, and had learned that the less you said after a certain point, the more room you had to work with later. Rex sat with his shoulder against Lucas's leg, and his eyes on the booth and his ears forward. The man at the counter had not moved since putting his phone face down. He was in his early 60s, gray at the temples, and he had the quality of stillness that distinguished people who were being deliberately unobtrusive from people who were simply uninvolved. Lucas had registered him when he came in, and had noted the stillness and had filed it, and was now in the specific way that trained attention works retrieving that filing and looking at it more carefully. Lucas said without looking away from the booth, "Sir, at the counter. What's your name?" The man looked up. He was not startled. "Frank DeLuca," he said. "Did you make a call tonight, Mr. DeLuca?" A pause. "I did," Frank said. "Who did you call? 911? Frank said. "About 6 minutes ago. I told them there was a situation developing at Keene's Diner on Merchant Street and that there was an officer on site managing it, but that backup would be useful." He put his hands flat on the counter. "I've been coming to this diner for 11 years. Martin Keene is a decent man who makes good pie. I didn't think it was the right moment to mind my own business." Lucas looked at him. "Thank you, Mr. DeLuca." Frank picked up his coffee. Seemed like the thing to do. The back door opened and Martin Keene came through it. He was 63 years old, and he moved the way men move who have spent 40 years on their feet in a working kitchen with the efficient economy of someone who has never had the luxury of wasted motion. He was not a large man, but he had the quality of physical steadiness that comes from decades of actual labor, the kind that builds something different in the body than exercise does. He looked at the booth, at Lucas, at Rex, at Emma behind the counter, and his face went through 4 expressions in 2 seconds before it settled into something controlled and very specific. He said, "Emma, are you all right?" "I'm fine," she said. "I'm fine, Dad." He looked at the booth, at Devlin. "Gerald Crail sent you," he said. It was not a question. Devlin looked at him. "Mr. Keene." "Don't," Martin said. His voice was not loud. It had the particular quiet of a man who has been a certain kind of angry for a long time and has found a register for it that does not require volume. "Don't say my name like you know me. You don't know me. You know what Crail wants from me, which is my building and my business, and you know that I've said no 8 times, and so he sent someone to my daughter." Martin stopped. His jaw was tight. "To my daughter." Devlin said, "Mr. Keene, nobody touched." "He grabbed her wrist," said one of the women at the middle table. Everyone looked at her. She was in her late 40s, with the composed expression of someone who had decided that being a bystander was no longer a position she was willing to hold. Her companion sat beside her with both hands around her mug, and nodded once. "I saw it," the first woman said. "His hand was on her wrist, and she asked him to let go and he didn't, not until the officer came over." Martin Keene looked at his daughter. Emma held his gaze and said nothing, and the nothing was its own confirmation. Martin looked at Devlin. Lucas stepped forward 1 inch, which was enough. "Mr. Keene," he said, "I'm going to need you to step back to the counter. I've got this." Martin looked at Lucas. He was not a man who stepped back easily. Lucas could see that the coiled quality of someone who had spent 63 years building something and had just been told that someone sent men to threaten his daughter in order to take it. But he was also a man who understood in the way that reasonable people understand things when they are paying attention that the officer in front of him was 25 years old and had stood in his diner alone for the better part of 10 minutes and had not escalated and had not panicked and had placed himself between his daughter and 2 men who were larger than him without making it into something that required force. Martin stepped back to the counter. "Thank you," Lucas said. He looked back at the booth. Devlin was watching Martin with the expression of a man doing math. The math of how much had been said, and by whom, and what the equation produced, and whether there was still an exit that did not cost him too much. "Devlin," Lucas said, "I want you to understand something. Not as a formality. Actually understand it." He let a beat pass. "What you did tonight crosses several lines. Intimidation, criminal threatening. The wrist contact with Ms. Keene is a battery regardless of how you frame the intent." He paused. "And everything Garrett said is on the record because he said it in front of witnesses in a public establishment." He looked at Devlin steadily. "What happens next is still something you have some input into. How cooperative you are, how accurate the information you provide matters. It matters right now in this room, while there is still a version of tonight that has options in it." Devlin said nothing for a long moment. Rex shifted his weight. Devlin looked at the dog. Something happened in his face that was not fear exactly, but was the adjacent thing, the thing that arrives when a person's body understands a situation slightly before their mind catches up. "Crail's not going to be happy," Devlin said quietly. Not to Lucas. More to the table in front of him. "That's not my concern tonight," Lucas said. "My concern tonight is this diner and these people." "He doesn't stop," Devlin said. "That's what you don't understand. He doesn't send 2 guys and then call it even when the 2 guys don't deliver. He's been doing this for 15 years in 4 counties. He builds and he acquires, and when something's in his way, he removes it. Us going to the station tonight doesn't remove it. It just changes the method." The diner was very quiet. Emma had her hand over her mouth. Not in shock, in the particular controlled response of someone who has just had their private fear named out loud by the person who was supposed to be delivering it. Martin's hands were flat on the counter, and he was looking at the booth with the expression of a man hearing something he had suspected for 8 months and had been hoping was not as real as it felt. Lucas said, "Are you telling me Crail has done this before? Sent people to threaten property owners?" Devlin looked at him. "I'm telling you, this diner is not the first stop on his list. And the people before your diner here, they sold. All of them." He stopped. "Because when Crail changes methods, the methods get harder to manage than 2 guys having dinner." Lucas looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "And you're telling me this why?" Devlin looked at his hands. "Because Garrett's 24 years old, and he's got a kid," he said quietly. "And I've been doing this long enough to know when a room has turned." Garrett looked at Devlin with the expression of someone who was not sure whether what just happened was a betrayal or a lifeline. Outside, 2 sets of headlights swept across the window of the diner. Backup had arrived. But it was what Devlin had said in the 40 seconds before the doors opened that changed the shape of the night completely. Because Gerald Crail had been acquiring properties in 4 counties for 15 years. And in 4 counties for 15 years, nobody had been sitting in the right diner at the right moment with a German shepherd and a working recording from the officer's body camera that had captured every word spoken in that booth from the moment Lucas Reed stood up. Rex stood. His tail moved once. And Lucas Reed reached for his radio. The 2 officers who came through the door were Senior Officers Dale Marsh and Christine Yu, and they came in, the way good backup comes in without drama, without the performative entry of people who need the room to know they have arrived. Marsh was 51, with the compact solidity of a man who had spent a career absorbing difficult situations without being broken by them. Yu was 34, sharp-eyed and quick, and she read the room in the first 4 seconds, with the focused efficiency of someone who had learned that the first 4 seconds were the ones that mattered. Rex acknowledged them with a glance and went back to watching the booth. Marsh looked at Lucas. "You good?" "We're good," Lucas said. 2 in the booth, cooperative at this point. Body cam has been running since I stood up. Marsh nodded. He looked at the booth. At Devlin, who looked back at him with the specific expression of a man who recognized a senior officer and was recalculating again. At Garrett, who had the expression of a 24-year-old who had a kid at home and had just spent 20 minutes understanding exactly how far a Tuesday night could travel from where it started. "Devlin," Marsh said. He said just the name. Devlin looked at him. Something shifted. "Marsh," he said. The table registered that. Lucas registered it. The way Devlin said the name was not the way you say the name of a stranger. It was the way you say the name of someone you have a history with, not a friendly history, the kind of history that lives in the particular wariness of 2 people who have been in adjacent rooms before. "You know each other," Lucas said. "We've met," Marsh said. His voice was even. "Devlin has come up in a couple of investigations over the past few years. Nothing that stuck." He looked at Devlin. "What are you doing in Millhaven?" "Property management," Devlin said. He said it with the faint smile of a man quoting a joke back. "Crail's operation," Marsh said. It was not a question. The smile faded. "I'm not making any statements without counsel." "You already made several," Marsh said. "I understand they're on camera." He looked at Lucas. "Read it to me later." He looked back at the booth. "Both of you, stand up slowly. Hands where I can see them." Devlin and Garrett stood. Yu moved to the right side of the booth with the practiced positioning of someone who had done this hundreds of times and knew where to be without being told. Marsh took the left. Lucas stayed where he was in the center, with Rex sitting at his heel, and watched the process with the focused attention of someone who understood that his part of this particular sequence was finished, and the next part belonged to the people who had just walked in. Devlin was cuffed first. He did not resist. He went through the process with the detached compliance of a man who had been through it before, and had decided that resistance at this stage was a waste of resource he would need later. His eyes moved around the room once cataloging and landed briefly on Emma behind the counter and then moved away. Garrett went next. "When you put the cuffs on," he said quietly, "I'm going to need to call someone about my son." Yu said, "We'll make sure that happens." He nodded once and said nothing else. Martin Keene had been standing at the counter through all of it with his hands flat on the surface and his eyes moving between his daughter and the booth with the measured attention of a man holding himself together through an act of discipline. When Garrett and Devlin were out the door with Yu, he exhaled a single, controlled breath, and then he looked at Emma. "Come here," he said. Emma went around the counter, and he put both arms around her and held her the way parents hold their children when they have been reminded suddenly and without warning that the distance between safety and danger is much smaller than they spend most of their time believing. She let him hold her for a moment. Then she stepped back. "I'm okay," she said. "I know you're okay," he said. "I'm holding you anyway." Frank DeLuca at the counter picked up his coffee and took a long sip and set it back down and said nothing, because there are moments in a room that do not need commentary, and Frank DeLuca was a man who knew when he was in one. Marsh sat down across from Martin at the counter. He had his notebook out and his pen, and he had the expression of a man who was about to ask for something he already knew was complicated. "Mr. Keene," he said, "I need to ask you some questions about Gerald Crail." Martin looked at him. "How long do you have?" "As long as it takes," Marsh said. Martin reached under the counter and produced a file folder that was, as Emma had described, approximately 4 inches thick. He set it on the counter. 8 months, he said. "This is 8 months of letters and offers and legal notices and 3 visits from men I didn't know who said things I couldn't prove in language I couldn't report." He looked at the folder. "I called the non-emergency line twice. Both times I was told there wasn't enough for them to do anything." Marsh said, "Who did you speak to?" Martin looked at him. "A sergeant named Pullman. Both times." Marsh wrote the name. His expression did not change, but something in the set of his jaw did a small adjustment that a person watching carefully would notice and file. Lucas noticed. He filed it. "The visits before tonight," Marsh said. "Did you get any names?" "They didn't give names," Martin said. "They came in and sat down and talked around things the way Devlin was talking tonight. Implications, suggestions, things that would be hard to explain to someone who wasn't in the room for them. But you understood what they meant." "I've been running a business for 30 years, Martin said. "I understood exactly what they meant." Marsh nodded. He wrote. He turned to Lucas. "Your cam footage from tonight. I want it pulled and reviewed at the station tonight. Not tomorrow. Tonight." "I'll submit it as soon as we're done here," Lucas said. "Good." Marsh looked at the file folder. "Mr. Keene, can I take this?" "Take the whole thing," Martin said. I made copies because I was not completely certain the originals would be safe if I gave them to someone and they disappeared." Marsh looked at him for a moment. "You didn't trust the department." Martin met his eyes. "I didn't trust the process," he said carefully. "I'm not making accusations. I'm telling you what an honest man does when he calls twice and gets nowhere twice and the letters keep coming." The table was quiet. Lucas looked at the folder. He thought about Devlin saying Crail had been doing this for 15 years in 4 counties. He thought about all the people who had sold. He thought about Sergeant Pullman's name being written in Marsh's notebook and Marsh's jaw doing the thing it did. "How many properties does Crail currently own on this block?" Lucas asked. Marsh looked at him. "That's a good question." "Because Garrett said the Keene Diner is the last holdout," Lucas said. "If Crail owns the rest of the block, the acquisition pattern should be visible in county records. Timeline purchase prices, any code enforcement actions that preceded sales. If the same pattern repeats across multiple addresses in multiple counties over 15 years, that's not real estate. That's a system." Marsh looked at him for a moment with the expression of a senior officer evaluating a junior one and finding something worth the evaluation. "How long have you been on the job?" 2 years, Lucas said. "You've been thinking about this since before we walked in, haven't you?" "Since Devlin said property management and Garrett said 4 counties, Lucas said. "Yes." Marsh picked up the file folder. "Get me your cam footage. I'm going to make some calls tonight." He stood and looked at Martin. "Do not open the diner tomorrow until you hear from me. I want your building documented as a potential crime scene for the intimidation charges, which means I want photographs and a walkthrough before regular business resumes." Martin said, I have a morning shift at 6. I know, Marsh said. I'll have someone here at 5. We'll be done by the time the coffee's ready. He looked at Martin steadily. You have my word on that. Martin looked at him. He was a man who had been given assurances twice by the department and had watched them come to nothing. He was doing the calculation that people do when they are deciding whether to trust again after the trust has been spent and not repaid. 5 o'clock, Martin said. 5 o'clock, Marsh confirmed. He extended his hand. Martin shook it. The handshake had the quality of something being established rather than something being completed. Marsh left. The two women at the middle table had not moved through any of this. The one who had spoken, whose name was Carol Biggs, had her hand on her companion's arm and was looking at Emma with an expression that had moved from the shock of earlier in the evening into something more settled. "Are you really all right?" Carol said. Emma looked at her. "I'm going to be," she said. It was the honest version of yes. "That young officer," Carol said, looking at Lucas. "He never raised his voice, not once." "No," Emma said. "He didn't." "That takes something," Carol said. "Standing that close to that kind of person and keeping everything that level. That takes something I don't think I have." She looked at Lucas directly. "Thank you." Lucas said, "You're welcome." Frank DeLuca put a 20 on the counter, which was significantly more than his tab, and stood and put his jacket on and looked at Martin. "I'll be in Thursday," he said, "assuming you're open." "We'll be open," Martin said. Frank nodded and left, and the bell above the door rang. Lucas was at the counter with his notebook finishing his own documentation of the evening, when Emma came and stood on the other side. "Rex," she said, "can I give him something?" Lucas looked at her. Rex was sitting beside the stool following the conversation with the particular attention of a dog who has decided the environment is secure and can now afford to track the interpersonal dynamics. "What do you have?" "My father keeps biscuits behind the counter," Emma said. "He started doing it after a K9 unit stopped in 2 years ago. He said if a dog was going to do the kind of work those animals do, the least he could do was have something waiting." Lucas looked at her for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "He can have one." Emma produced a biscuit from behind the counter. She looked at Rex. "Is it okay if I give it to him directly?" "Hold it flat," Lucas said. "He'll take it gentle." She held it out. Rex looked at it. He looked at Lucas. Lucas gave him the smallest possible nod, and Rex took the biscuit from Emma's palm with the careful precision of an animal who understood that the care with which you take something matters as much as the taking. Emma looked at her hand. "He didn't even touch my skin," she said. "He never does," Lucas said. Emma leaned against the counter. The adrenaline of the evening was completing its cycle through her body and leaving behind the particular exhausted clarity that comes when the immediate crisis is over and the full weight of what just happened has room to land. She had been managing it through every minute of the past hour with the same competence she brought to the dinner rush and the difficult tables and the 4-inch folder of correspondence, and now that the room was quiet and her father was on the phone in the back office and Frank was gone and Carol was putting on her coat, there was nothing left to manage, and she had to simply stand in the aftermath and be a 22-year-old woman who had been grabbed by the wrist in her father's diner by a man sent by someone who wanted her family's home. Lucas said without looking up from his notebook, "You did well tonight." Emma looked at him. "I didn't do anything." "You didn't escalate it," he said. "You didn't freeze. You kept your hands visible and your voice level, and you stayed on your feet." He looked up. "In that kind of situation, those things matter. A lot of people don't manage all three." Emma said, "I was scared." "I know," he said. "That's not the same as not doing well." And she was quiet for a moment. "How did you know?" "When you stood up." How did you know it was the right moment? Lucas thought about it. Rex knew first, he said. I've learned to trust that. He read Devlin before I had enough information to act on. The growl wasn't aggression, it was a signal. He was telling me we'd passed the point where watching was the right call. He looked at Rex. He's been doing that for 4 years. He's right more often than I am. Rex looked up at his name, and then looked back at the door with the patient vigilance of an animal who had resolved one situation and was already monitoring for the next. Emma looked at the dog for a long moment. My father has that folder, she said. 8 months of it. And before I came home, he was managing it alone. Every letter, every visit, every time one of those men sat in his diner and implied things without saying them, he was handling it alone because he didn't want me to know. Her voice was steady, but it was doing work to be steady. He didn't tell me how bad it was. He just kept saying the diner was going through a rough patch and that things would sort themselves out. Because he didn't want you to worry, Lucas said. Because he didn't want me to come home for the wrong reasons, Emma said. He wanted me to come back because I wanted to be here, not because he needed me to protect something. She pressed her lips together. I came home anyway, 2 months ago, because I looked at him on a video call, and I could see it, whatever he was carrying. I could see the weight of it, even though he wasn't saying anything. She stopped. I just didn't know what it was yet. Lucas said, He knows now that you're here. Yeah, Emma said. He does. Martin came out of the back office. He had his phone in his hand, and his face had the expression of a man who had just finished a difficult call and was carrying the residue of it, but was not going to let it show more than necessary. That was a reporter, he said. Lucas looked up. Local paper, Martin said. Someone at the scene apparently made a call. She wants to know if I'll talk to her. He looked at the file folder on the counter. About Crail. About what's been happening. Lucas said, That's your decision, Mr. Keene. I can't advise you either way, but I will tell you that documentation in the public record has a way of making certain actions more difficult for certain people to take. Martin looked at him. You mean if Crail knows people know, he gets more careful? I mean if Crail knows there's a public record of what happened in this diner tonight, the calculus on whatever comes next changes, Lucas said. That's all I mean. Martin looked at the phone in his hand. Then he looked at Emma. What do you think? He said. Emma looked at him. Her father, 63 years old, who had built this diner from a leased counter space and a borrowed fryer, and 30 years of being the kind of person who showed up before anyone else and stayed after everyone left. Who had carried 4 inches of harassment for 8 months without telling his daughter because he did not want her to come home for the wrong reasons. Who had kept biscuits behind the counter for working dogs because he believed that things worth protecting deserved something prepared and waiting. I think, Emma said, that you have been quiet about this for 8 months, and quiet hasn't helped. Martin looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the phone. Her name's Weiss, he said. The reporter, Patricia Weiss. She's been at the Millhaven Courier for 20 years. Emma said, Do you trust her? Her father used to come in on Sundays, Martin said. Corned beef hash and 2 eggs, same thing every week for 12 years before he passed. He was a decent man. He put the phone on the counter. I think I trust her. Then call her back, Emma said. Martin picked up the phone. Lucas finished his notation and capped his pen, and looked at Rex. Rex looked back at him with the amber eyes that had started the whole evening by refusing to look away from a situation that everyone else in the room was hoping would resolve itself without requiring anything from them. Good boy, Lucas said quietly. Rex's tail moved once. Outside, a car drove slowly past the diner. Not a police car. A dark sedan that did not stop, did not accelerate, just moved past at the pace of something that was measuring a distance or reading a number above a door. Lucas saw it through the window. Rex saw it too. His ears went forward. And Lucas Reed, who had learned 4 years ago to trust what his partner's body told him, before his own mind caught up, reached for his radio, and was already talking when the sedan reached the corner and turned and disappeared into the dark. The plate on the sedan was registered to a leasing company. Lucas had it back in 4 minutes through dispatch, which was fast enough to confirm that the car was not owned by any individual whose name would mean anything, and experienced enough with how these things worked. To know that a car registered to a leasing company and driven slowly past a diner at 9:47 on a Tuesday night was not coincidence. It was a message. The kind that could not be reported, could not be documented beyond his own radio call, and was designed specifically to communicate one thing to the people inside the building. We know where you are. We are still watching. Nothing you did tonight changes that. Lucas relayed the plate and the direction of travel and the time to dispatch, and asked for a patrol to run the adjacent streets. Dispatch confirmed. He put the radio back on his belt and looked at the window for another moment before he looked at Martin. Martin had seen the car. He was standing at the counter with his phone in his hand and his eyes on the street, and his face had gone to a place that was past anger and into something colder and more durable. The look of a man who has just understood that the situation is not resolved because 2 people were walked out in handcuffs. The look of a man updating his calculation of what he is actually dealing with. "That was him?" Martin said. "Or someone working for him," Lucas said. "We don't know it was Crail directly." "I know," Martin said, not arguing, just stating what he knew in the way a man states things he knows without needing to be believed. Emma had seen it too. She was at the window, not pressing close to it, standing back the way Lucas had positioned himself far enough to see without being seen clearly from outside. She watched the street for another moment, and then turned back to the room. "He wanted us to see it," she said. "Yes," Lucas said. "Which means he already knows Devlin and Garrett are in custody, and he's not changing his approach. He's accelerating it." She looked at Lucas directly. "He's telling my father that the police being involved doesn't change anything." Lucas looked at her. She had worked it out faster than most people would have the specific logic of what a slow-moving sedan past a window communicated in the context of everything that had come before it. He filed that. "That's what it means," he said. "Then we can't close the diner tonight and wait for tomorrow," Emma said. "Closing tonight is the same as saying the message worked." Martin looked at her. "Emma, I mean it, Dad. If we close, we confirm that he can move us. We stay open." She looked at Lucas. "Can you stay?" Lucas looked at the time. His shift had technically ended 40 minutes ago. He had been in the diner on his own time when Devlin grabbed Emma's wrist. He thought about the cam footage he needed to submit, and the documentation he needed to complete, and the patrol Marsh had asked for at 5 in the morning. "I can stay until Marsh sends someone to relieve me," he said, "which I'm going to request right now." He reached for his radio. Martin said, "I'm not asking you to do that." "I know," Lucas said. "I'm doing it." He made the call. Marsh came back to him in 90 seconds, which meant Marsh had been waiting near his radio, which meant Marsh was running his own version of the same calculation and had arrived at the same place. "Stay put," Marsh said through the radio. "I'm sending you back to park outside. Visible. I want Crail's people to see the unit when they drive past again." A pause. "And Reed, the cam footage from tonight. I reviewed the first 20 minutes on my phone in the parking lot." Another pause, shorter. That's good work. That's genuinely good work. Lucas said, "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me. Submit it. And then I need you to write me a separate memo, your own words about what Devlin said regarding the prior incidents and the Pullman calls. I want that documented independently of the cam record." Lucas said, "I'll have it to you by midnight." "Good." The radio clicked off. Emma was looking at him. What was that about Pullman? Lucas thought for a moment about what to say. He was 25 years old, and 2 years into his job, and he was standing in a diner where a senior officer had written a name in his notebook, and his jaw had moved in a specific way, and that same senior officer had just asked Lucas to document something independently of the official camera record, which was procedurally sound, but was also the way experienced officers protected a chain of evidence when they were not certain the chain was entirely secure. He chose to be honest. "Pullman is a name that came up," he said. "Your father called the non-emergency line twice and spoke to a Sergeant Pullman both times. Marsh is interested in that." Martin said, "You think Pullman sat on the reports?" "I don't know that," Lucas said carefully. "But Marsh thinks it's possible." "I think Marsh is a thorough officer who doesn't like loose threads," Lucas said. "That's all I know for certain." Martin looked at the file folder that was no longer on the counter because Marsh had taken it with him. He looked at the space where it had been. 30 years, he said. "I've been paying taxes and following rules and serving this community for 30 years, and I called the police twice and got nowhere, and Crail knew he could keep going because nobody was going to stop him." He was not angry when he said it. He was tired. The specific tiredness of a man who has been reasonable for a very long time in circumstances that did not reward reasonableness. I keep thinking about the other people, the ones before us, the ones who sold. Emma said, "They didn't have anything to fight with." "They had the same right to protection I have," Martin said. "The same right to call and have someone take it seriously." Lucas said nothing because there was nothing useful to say to that. The statement was accurate, and the accuracy of it was its own kind of weight, and adding words to it would not make it lighter. The bell above the door rang. Everyone in the room looked at it. The woman who came in was in her late 40s, with the compact energy of someone who moved through the world at a pace that consistently surprised people who underestimated her. She had a bag over one shoulder and a recorder in her hand that was already running, and she looked at the room with the specific alertness of a journalist who has received a call and driven faster than was technically advisable to get here, and is now taking in a scene that is more than she expected. "Patricia Weiss," she said. "Millhaven Courier. Martin Keene called me back." Martin looked at Lucas. Lucas looked at the recorder. "Ms. Weiss, I need to ask you to turn that off until we've established what you can and can't include from tonight's events." Weiss looked at him. Then she looked at the recorder. Then she turned it off, with the particular grace of a journalist who has learned that compliance at the beginning of a conversation buys significantly more than resistance does. "Fair enough," she said. She sat at the counter without being invited and looked at Martin. "Your daughter called me 8 months ago," she said. The room went still. Martin looked at Emma. Emma looked at the counter. "I found one of the letters," she said. "Last March, before I came home. I was on a video call with you and you left the desk for a minute, and I could see the letter on your desk from the camera. The return address was Crail Acquisitions." She stopped. I looked them up. I found 3 other businesses in 2 counties that had sold to Crail after similar contact. I called the courier because I thought if someone was looking into it, I should say something. She looked at her father. "I didn't tell you because I wasn't sure anything would come of it, and I didn't want to worry you about something I couldn't confirm." Martin stared at his daughter for a long moment. His jaw was working. He was doing the arithmetic of a father who has been protecting his child from information, while his child has been protecting him from the same information, and the simultaneity of that, the specific loneliness of two people who love each other, both carrying the same weight alone, was visible in his face in a way he was not trying to hide. "Emma," he said. "I know," she said. "I should have told you." "That's not—" He stopped. He put his hand on the counter and looked at it. "That's not what I was going to say." "What were you going to say?" "I was going to say you are exactly like your mother," he said quietly. "She always did the work before she said anything about it. She always knew more than she let on." He looked at her. "I used to drive her crazy trying to figure out how much she knew." Emma pressed her lips together. She was not going to cry in front of a journalist and a police officer, and she did not cry, but the effort of it was visible for exactly 2 seconds. And then she was composed again. And she was very much, Lucas thought, exactly like what her father had just said. Weiss said very quietly, "I've been working on Crail for 7 months." Martin looked at her. "Your daughter's call was not the first," Weiss said. "It was the 4th. By the time she called, I had spoken to 2 former business owners who had sold under similar circumstances, and 1 property lawyer who had reviewed the correspondence sent to 3 of Crail's targets and had agreed to speak anonymously about the pattern." She put her bag on the counter and opened it, and produced a folder that was, if not 4 inches thick, at least a meaningful fraction of Martin's. "I was waiting for a primary source who would speak on the record. Someone with documentation and a willingness to put their name to it." She looked at Martin. "And then tonight happened, and you called me back, and here I am." Lucas looked at the folder. Then he looked at Weiss. "What's in that? 7 months of Crail's acquisition history in this county and 2 adjacent ones," she said. 14 properties. 12 sold after some form of documented or described pressure. The pattern of code enforcement actions preceding sales. A financial trail showing that 3 of the 14 purchases were significantly below assessed value, which only happens when a seller is motivated to accept less than the property is worth. She paused. "And a name." Martin said, "Whose name?" Weiss looked at Lucas, then back at Martin. "An elected official who sits on the county zoning board and has voted in favor of every Crail development application for the past 6 years, including 2 applications that were initially flagged for compliance issues and then passed without amendment." She paused. "His name is Councilman Roger Aldis." The counter was very quiet. Lucas had his notebook out and his pen moving before he was fully aware that he had reached for them. "That name needs to go to Marsh tonight," Lucas said. "Not tomorrow." "I know," Weiss said. "That's why I'm here. I've been sitting on this story for 7 months because I needed someone on the record, and I needed law enforcement involved before I published, because if I publish without those pieces, Crail's lawyers bury it in 24 hours, and the people who talk to me pay for it." She looked at Martin. "But if the department has an open criminal investigation that includes a body cam record of intimidation and a corroborating witness statement and 7 months of financial documentation in a journalist's folder, the story becomes something that cannot be buried." She looked at him steadily. "Are you willing to be that person, Mr. Keene, on the record? Your name, your diner, what happened tonight?" Martin looked at the folder. At Emma. At the space behind the counter, where 30 years of early mornings and late nights and corned beef hash for 12 years, for a man whose daughter called his diner 8 months ago without telling her father, because she did not want him to worry, were layered into every surface and every smell and every imperfection in the floor tiles. "My wife used to say," Martin said, "that the only difference between a bully and a businessman is whether someone with a camera shows up." He looked at Weiss. "She was an English teacher for 31 years. She had a gift for getting to the thing." Weiss said. "She sounds like someone worth quoting." "She was," Martin said. He straightened on his stool. "Yes, on the record. My name, my diner tonight, all of it." Weiss opened her recorder and set it on the counter. Lucas's phone buzzed. He looked at it. Marsh. He stepped away from the counter and answered. "Two things," Marsh said. "First, Garrett talked. Full statement. He's been with Crail's operation for 14 months, and he documented 6 previous intimidation visits to 4 properties. He named 2 other men who were used before Devlin and him. He also named the code enforcement officer, who initiated the compliance reviews before 3 of the sales." Marsh stopped. "The code enforcement officer is Aldis's brother-in-law." Lucas closed his eyes for half a second. "That's not a coincidence." "No," Marsh said. "It is not." A pause. "Second thing. The Pullman situation. I made a call tonight to someone I trust in internal affairs. I gave them Pullman's name and the 2 dates of Martin Keen's calls. They ran it in 20 minutes. Another pause longer. Pullman filed abbreviated reports both times that listed the calls as resolved with no further action. The reports don't include the specific content of the calls, which means there's no record of what Keen actually told him." Lucas said Pullman sanitized the reports. "That's what it looks like," Marsh said. "We don't have confirmation yet, but Internal Affairs is opening a review." He stopped. "Reed, this thing is bigger than a Tuesday night coffee run." "Yes, sir," Lucas said. "I know. How's the diner?" Lucas looked at Martin talking to Weiss, the folder. Between them, Martin's hand steady on the counter, Emma standing beside her father with her shoulder against his, and her eyes on the recorder with the expression of someone who has been waiting without fully knowing it to say something true out loud for a very long time. "The diner's good," Lucas said. "The diner is holding." "Good," Marsh said. "You is outside. You stay in until I tell you otherwise." The call ended. Lucas came back to the counter. Rex, who had been lying under the stool through the phone call with the patient alertness of an animal who was off active duty but monitoring, lifted his head when Lucas returned. Lucas put his hand briefly on Rex's back. The 2-finger acknowledgement that meant "I see you," and "I've got it," and Rex put his head back down. Weiss was asking Martin about the first letter. Martin was describing it in the careful detail of a man who had read something so many times he had memorized it without intending to. Emma was beside him, and she was not interjecting, but she was present in the way that mattered, the presence of someone who knows that the person speaking needs to be heard, and has decided that her job right now is to make sure that hearing happens completely. Lucas sat on the stool at the end of the counter and opened his notebook to a clean page, and began writing the memo Marsh had asked for his own words, the things Devlin had said, and in what order, and in what tone, and with what specific implications the things that the camera had captured. But that a camera captures differently than a person who was in the room, who felt the temperature of it, and the quality of the silence, and the specific way a man's hand on a young woman's wrist communicates something that the law calls by one name, and people who have felt it call by another. He wrote for 20 minutes. He was on the 2nd page when Emma set a mug of coffee in front of him. He had not asked for it. She had not asked if he wanted it. She set it down the way her father's diner had always operated, by paying attention to what people needed before they said it, which was its own form of care. "Thank you," Lucas said. Emma looked at him. Then she looked at Rex. "He's the one who started it," she said. "If he hadn't growled when he did, I don't know where tonight goes." Lucas looked at Rex, who was looking at the door with the patient, amber-eyed vigilance that was simply his baseline. Simply what he was, the thing that had been true about him since before Lucas knew him, and would be true about him long after. "He was always going to growl," Lucas said. "That's who he is. He sees what's real before the rest of us catch up." He paused. He was telling me the room had already passed the point where watching was appropriate. He's always right about that. Emma looked at the dog for a long moment. "My father's going to put his picture up," she said. "Behind the counter. I already know it." Lucas looked at Rex. Rex did not look back because he was watching the door, because outside in the dark on the street that ran past a diner that was not going to close and not going to sell a patrol unit was parked with its lights visible and its presence speaking the only language that a slow-moving sedan in the dark understood, which was that this address was not unprotected, that what happened inside it mattered to someone with the authority to act, that the man who had been sending letters and making visits and driving past windows had made a mistake tonight in the specific form of choosing a diner where a 25-year-old officer was sitting in the corner booth over his second cup of coffee with a German shepherd under the table, who never looked away from something real. Rex's tail moved once. The diner stayed open. And in Millhaven, for the first time in 8 months, the night felt like it belonged to the people inside it. The Millhaven Courier ran the story at 6 the following morning. Not on the back page. Not in the local interest section where small-town stories went to be politely acknowledged and quietly forgotten. Patricia Weiss put it on the front page above the fold with Martin Keene's name in the headline, and a photograph of the diner's exterior that she had taken herself at 10:45 the previous night, the patrol unit visible in the frame, the lights of the harbor light burning through the window against the dark. The headline read, "30 years, one family, and the man who tried to buy their silence." By 7:15, the story had been shared 400 times on the Courier's social media page. By 8, it was 1,100. By the time Martin unlocked the front door of Keene's family diner at 6:03, which was 2 minutes later than his usual time because he had stood in the back reading the article on his phone with his reading glasses on, and his coffee going cold beside him, 3 people were already waiting on the sidewalk. Not for breakfast. To tell him they had read the story, and they were sorry, and they were going to be regulars from today forward, if he would have them. Martin looked at the 3 people on the sidewalk for a moment. Then he held the door open and said, "Come in, coffee's ready." Emma was behind the counter when the first call came in. 8:22. A woman who identified herself as the former owner of a bookshop on Clement Street 2 towns over sold to Crail Acquisitions 14 months ago, after what she described in a voice that shook in the specific way voices shake when a person has been holding something too long and has finally found someone to hand it to. She said she had tried to tell people. She said no one had listened. She said she had read the story 3 times before she found the number. Emma wrote down everything the woman said, every detail, every date, every name she mentioned. When the call ended, she looked at the notes, and then she looked at her father, who was taking an order at the counter with the same easy competence he brought to every shift, as if the previous night had been simply another thing that had happened in 30 years of things happening in his diner. And she understood something about him that she had not fully understood before, which was that his steadiness was not the absence of feeling. It was a decision renewed every single morning that the diner was going to open, and the coffee was going to be ready, and the people who came through the door were going to be treated well, and no letter, and no visit, and no man in a sedan driving slowly past in the dark was going to change that sequence. She picked up the phone and called Weiss. Lucas came in at 9. He was not in uniform. He had gone home at midnight after you confirmed she had the exterior slept, 4 hours showered, and come back in the clothes of a person who had a morning off, and had decided to spend it in a diner, which was not an accident. He sat in the corner booth. Rex sat under the table. Emma brought him coffee without asking, and he accepted it with the nod of someone who has been coming to a place long enough that the rituals of it have become part of how the day feels right. "How many calls?" he said. 7 by 9, Emma said. "Former business owners, too. Residents who know Crail's properties and have seen the pattern. One lawyer who says he has a client who was coerced into selling and wants to know if there is now an active investigation he can refer to." "There is," Lucas said. "Marsh is running it formally as of this morning. The DA's office has been briefed." Emma looked at him. "That was fast." "The cam footage was fast," Lucas said. "Marsh had it reviewed by the DA's office at 11 last night. The battery charge on Devlin is solid. The criminal threatening charge is solid. And Garrett's statement about the 6 prior incidents is being corroborated against property records this morning." He paused. "Aldis resigned from the zoning board at 7 this morning." Emma stared at him. "His office released a statement saying he was stepping down for personal reasons," Lucas said. "Nobody in the building believes that, including the people in his office, but the statement is out." He looked at his coffee. "His brother-in-law, the code enforcement officer, called in sick today, which is the kind of sick that has lawyers attached to it." "They're cutting loose," Emma said. "They're doing what people do when the ground shifts under something they built," Lucas said. "They look for the exit that costs them least." "Will they find one?" Lucas thought about it. "Aldis, maybe. If his direct involvement in the intimidation campaign can't be documented beyond the zoning votes, which are technically legal, even if the motivation behind them wasn't, he might walk away with his pension." He paused. "Crail won't. Not with Garrett's statement and the financial trail Weiss documented, and the DA actively interested. That combination closes the exits." Emma said, "Pullman." "Internal Affairs opened the formal review last night," Lucas said. "Marsh gave me that at 7 this morning." He stopped. "He also told me something else." Emma waited. "The 2 calls your father made," Lucas said. "The abbreviated reports Pullman filed. I pulled the call recordings from the system because calls to the non-emergency line are recorded automatically. The recordings show that your father described the intimidation pattern clearly, specifically with dates and contact details both times." He looked at Emma directly. "Pullman had everything he needed to open an investigation 8 months ago. He chose not to, and then he filed reports that made it look like your father's calls were vague complaints with nothing actionable." Emma put both hands on the table. "He buried it," she said. "Yes. For 8 months while Crail kept sending people, while my father kept getting letters, while 12 other businesses sold because nobody stopped it, Pullman knew and did nothing." "Yes," Lucas said. Emma was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that contains something large being processed in a space that is not large enough for it. Then she said, "Is he going to face anything real? Or is it going to be administrative and quiet, and he's going to retire in 18 months with everything intact?" Lucas said, "I don't know. That is an honest answer, and I want to give you honest answers." He paused. "What I know is that the recording is in the hands of people who cannot now claim they didn't know. That matters. What they do with it is not something I control." Emma looked at him. "Does that frustrate you?" "Every day," he said. "That's also an honest answer." The bell above the door rang. Marsh came in, and he was in full uniform, and he did not sit down. He stood at the end of the counter, and he had the expression of a man who has been awake since before dawn and has not had time to process most of what he has been receiving, but is running it in the background efficiently. Martin came from the kitchen and stood behind the counter, and he and Marsh looked at each other across the counter with the particular regard of 2 people who have been through a night that revealed more than either expected. "I owe you an apology," Marsh said. Martin looked at him. "For what specifically?" "For the 2 calls," Marsh said. "I'm not Pullman, and I didn't file those reports, and I didn't know about them until last night. But I am the department, and the department failed you, and that failure had a specific cost that I can see clearly now, and I want to say to your face that it was wrong." Martin was quiet for a moment. He was not a man who accepted things quickly when the acceptance was complicated. "My wife used to say," Martin said, "that an apology without a change is just a noise." He looked at Marsh. "What's the change?" Marsh put his hand in his jacket pocket and produced a card. He set it on the counter. "My direct cell, not dispatch, not the desk, me. If anything happens, any car that drives past any letter, any person, any sense that something is wrong, you call that number." He looked at Martin steadily. "Day or night, that is not a courtesy. That is a commitment." Martin looked at the card. He picked it up. He turned it over once. "Thank you," he said. He put the card in his shirt pocket over his chest. Marsh nodded. He looked at the room, the full counter, the 3 tables that were already occupied, and filling the window table where Carol Biggs was back with her companion, apparently having decided that the diner she had been sitting in last night was somewhere she intended to keep sitting. His eyes moved to Lucas in the corner booth. "Reed," he said. "Sir." "Good work last night." "Thank you, sir." "Don't let it go to your head. You've got a full shift in 4 hours, and I need the supplemental report on my desk before you start." "It's already in your inbox," Lucas said. "I sent it at 6:40. Marsh looked at him. Something moved in his expression that was not quite a smile, but was what a smile looks like when it lives behind the face of a man who has spent 30 years deciding when to show it and when to hold it back. "Good," he said. He looked at Rex. Rex looked back at him with the amber-eyed assessment that Rex gave everyone, regardless of rank. "Good dog," Marsh said. Then he left. The bell rang. And then it rang again, because 2 more people came in while Marsh was going out, and one of them was Frank DeLuca, who settled on his usual stool and put his phone face down and accepted his coffee from Emma, with the nod of a man who intended to be here for however long the morning went. At 10:15, the second twist of the morning arrived in the form of a phone call to the diner's landline. Emma answered it. The voice on the other end was a woman's, clipped and precise, and carrying the particular quality of someone who had prepared what they were going to say before they dialed. "Is this Emma Keene?" "It is," Emma said. "My name is Helen Marsh," the woman said. "Dale Marsh is my husband. I have been a paralegal for 22 years, and I read the Courier story this morning, and I spoke with Dale at 7, and I want to offer something if you're willing to hear it." Emma said, "Go ahead." "The 7 people who called you this morning," Helen said, "and the others who will call as the story continues to move. They are potential complainants in a civil case against Crail Acquisitions and against the individuals who facilitated his operation. A class action, if the pattern can be documented across all 14 properties, would not only produce financial remedy for the businesses that sold under duress, it would produce a public record of the full scope of what Crail built that no criminal settlement can seal or minimize. She paused. "I am not your lawyer, and I am not offering to be. But I know lawyers who do this work and do it correctly, and I would like to connect you with one of them if you are interested." Emma looked at the notes from the morning's calls sitting on the counter beside her. 7 names, 7 stories, 7 versions of the same weight carried by different people who had not known there were others carrying it too, until one diner on one Tuesday night had not closed and not sold and not been quiet. "Yes," Emma said. "I'm interested." She wrote down the name Helen gave her, and she put it in her apron pocket next to her pen, and she went back to work. Keen's family diner stayed full through the lunch hour. Martin worked the kitchen, and Emma worked the floor, and Frank DeLuca drank 3 cups of coffee and did not leave until 1 in the afternoon, at which point he put another 20 on the counter and told Martin it was the best meal he had eaten in a diner since his wife passed, and that was 12 years of eating in diners as a data point. Martin said, "Come back Thursday." "I'll be here Tuesday too," Frank said, "and Wednesday." At 2 in the afternoon, when the lunch rush had settled and the counter had 2 stools occupied, and the afternoon was the particular quiet of a diner that has done its work and is resting, Lucas came back from his patrol shift and sat in the corner booth again. He had not planned to. He was done for the day, and his apartment was 12 minutes away, and there were things he could be doing with his evening that did not involve sitting in a diner. But Rex had turned toward Merchant Street when they passed the intersection on the drive home, and Lucas had turned with him, because that was what 4 years of partnership had taught him, that when Rex oriented toward something, it was worth orienting with him, and they had ended up back in the corner booth with 2 fingers of coffee and the low afternoon light and the smell of the grill cooling down. Emma came over. She sat across from him, which she had not done before, always the other side of the counter, always the position of a person at work. She sat across from him with her hands wrapped around her own mug, and she looked tired in the productive way of someone who has been tired by things that were worth the expenditure. 7 calls became 11 by noon, she said. "I know," Lucas said. "Marsh told me. The lawyer Helen connected you to has already spoken to 4 of them." 3 of the 4 want to move forward, Emma said. The 4th needs more time. "That's how it goes," Lucas said. "People move at different speeds when they've been scared a long time." Emma looked at her mug. "I keep thinking about last night. The sedan going past. The way it felt." She stopped. "I was not afraid when Devlin had my wrist. I was cold and clear and I knew what I needed to do. But that car going past in the dark when everything should have been over, that scared me more than anything else in the evening." She looked at Lucas. "Why is that?" Lucas thought about it. "Because the direct threat has a form," he said. "You can respond to a form. You can plant your feet and keep your voice level and look at it and say, 'Let go of my wrist,' and that is a specific action against a specific thing." He paused. "The car in the dark has no form. It's just the knowledge that something larger than tonight is still moving. And the things we can't see the shape of are harder to stand in front of than the things we can." Emma looked at him. "But you stand in front of them anyway." "You do too," he said. She looked at Rex under the table. Rex had his head on his paws, and his eyes open, and his ears in the relaxed forward position of an animal that has assessed the room as safe, and is resting without fully standing down, because that was not a thing Rex did. He did not fully stand down. He rested at the edge of readiness the way certain people rest at the edge of readiness. The people who have chosen a life where readiness is the baseline, because the alternative is leaving something unprotected. "What happened to Garrett?" Emma said. "He's cooperating fully," Lucas said. "His lawyer negotiated a reduced charge in exchange for his complete testimony. He'll serve community hours and a probationary period." He paused. "He's 24 with a 2-year-old daughter. He made bad choices for bad reasons, and he had the sense to stop making them when the room gave him the opportunity." He looked at the table. "That's not nothing. People who take the opportunity when it's offered are the ones who can sometimes build something different afterward." Emma was quiet for a moment. "And Devlin Devlin is not cooperating, Lucas said. Which is his right, and also the decision of a man who has calculated that loyalty to Crail in the short term is worth more than the reduced charge available to him right now. He may revise that calculation when he understands how much Garrett has already given. He paused. He may not. Some people would rather be right than free. 3 weeks later, Gerald Crail was formally charged with criminal intimidation conspiracy to commit fraud and 4 counts of coercion across 2 counties. The charges carried the weight of Garrett's testimony and Weiss's financial documentation and the cam footage from a Tuesday night in a corner booth and the recorded calls from a non-emergency line that had been filed away by a sergeant who had believed for 8 months that what was buried stayed buried. Sergeant Pullman resigned before the internal affairs review was complete. His resignation was not accepted as a resolution. The review continued. Councilman Roger Aldis issued a second statement 3 days after the first, this one significantly longer and significantly less composed than the retirement announcement confirming that he had accepted payments from Crail Acquisitions over a 4-year period in exchange for favorable zoning consideration. The DA's office had anticipated the statement by 12 hours. The civil case that Helen Marsh's referral set in motion took 14 months to reach settlement. 11 former business owners received financial remedy that did not restore what they had lost, but acknowledged formally in documented legal language that what was taken from them had been taken by means that the law recognized as wrong. Martin Keene did not join the civil case. He had not sold. He had nothing to recover. What he had was a diner that was full on mornings it had not been full before, and a daughter who had come home for reasons that turned out to be the right ones, and a 4-inch folder of correspondence that Marsh had asked him to preserve as evidence, and which Martin had photocopied twice before surrendering the original, because 30 years of building something had taught him that you made copies of things that mattered, and you kept them somewhere safe. He kept the copies in the office next to a photograph of his wife in her classroom at the end of her last year of teaching. Standing with her students, her hand raised mid-sentence, caught in the particular energy of a woman in the middle of explaining something she believed in. On the counter behind the register, between the coffee maker and the biscuit jar that had always been there for working dogs, Martin put a framed photograph. Rex, sitting under a corner booth with his amber eyes open and his ears forward, and the absolute undeflectable attention of an animal who had decided something mattered and was not going to look away from it. Emma had taken the photo the morning after. She had not told Lucas she was going to do it. She had come to the booth with a mug of coffee, and when she set it down, she had taken out her phone and photographed the dog without ceremony, because she had understood in the way you understand things when you have been through a night that clarifies what is and is not important, that some things deserve to be on the record. Lucas saw the photograph on his next visit and said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, "He's going to be insufferable about this." Emma said, "Good." Rex under the table did not look at the photograph. He was watching the door. The same door he had been watching since the first night. The door that people came through, some of them with bad intentions, and some of them with good ones, and some of them who had not yet decided, and his job, the job he had done every day of his working life, without complaint or uncertainty, or the need for anyone to confirm that it mattered, was to know the difference before the room did, and to make sure that the person beside him knew it too. Some nights the door opened, and nothing came through it but cold air and the sound of the street. Some nights the door opened, and something real came through it that required everything. A well-trained dog and a steady young officer, and a 22-year-old woman who stood her ground, and a 63-year-old man who kept the coffee ready had between them. Rex was prepared for either. He was always prepared for either, because that was what it meant to be the one who watched, and watching, in the end, was its own form of protection, quiet and constant and unbreakable, the kind that does not announce itself, and does not require recognition, and does not stop simply because the night has gone quiet and the door has stayed closed. Keen's family diner opened every morning at 6. The coffee was always ready, and Rex was always in the corner booth. And that was enough. That was exactly enough. If this story reached something real in you today, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment with the name of your city and type Amen. If you believe that ordinary people standing their ground is the only thing that has ever actually stopped the people who believe they cannot be stopped. God bless every small business built with 30 years of early mornings. God bless every family that holds on when the pressure says let go. And God bless every loyal dog who sees what the room has not yet seen and speaks the only truth that matters, which is that something here is worth protecting and I am not going to look away.